Good morning, good morning, good morning. What's up, everybody? That was so whack. Philip, nobody's excited to be in church today, bro. Hey, I got a really good friend in church today. I got some of my best friends in the whole world, Philip and Lena Mitchell. Could you just stand up and say, can we just give them a shout of love real quick? They pastor a church in Atlanta called 2819, and it's a beautiful movement. It's more than a church. It's a beautiful movement, and been forever. We've been buddies for a long time, man, and yeah, it's been crazy, a long time. And it's just been fun to watch their church grow and flourish, and, you know, if I have questions, I call Philip, and if he has questions, he calls me. And it's just a beautiful brotherhood that we have. And so it's an honor to have him and his whole family here with us today. And so if you see him when they're walking around, make sure you show them some love, okay? Them and their family are here. You guys are here for only 2 days? They just needed to get the heck away from Atlanta, you know, and come to New England. Why would you do that? Anyway. All right, so we're going to jump in. If you got a Bible, we're going to be at 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and 7 today. We are going to continue on. We're in this sermon series called The Naked Truth, where we're just talking very vulnerably, honestly, about the nature of sex and relationships and intimacy. Last week we talked about really the title of my message was The Look, and just the importance of making sure our eyes are focused where they need to be. Jesus says very clearly the eye is kind of like the light to the body, and if the whole eye is, and if the light is darkness, then the whole body is going to be dark, right? And so we looked at that last week, and we're going to continue talking on this topic when it comes to sex. It's going to be not provocative, but very vulnerable and honest today. And so anybody who thinks that the scriptures don't have a lot to say about this topic have never read the scriptures, because scriptures are clear and got a lot to communicate to us. And so today we live in a society where culture would say, well, God can't be known, God can't be understood, God isn't real, there's no such thing as ultimate truth, there's no moral authority, all truth is relative. What you believe to be true is true for you, what I believe to be true is true for me, but we don't know what to do if my truth says your truth is a lie, right? We don't know what to do with that one, and so we're just like, live your best life, YOLO, you only live once, like, do you. And so it's a very individualistic society, specifically around this culture, around sex, this topic of sex, right? It's very individualistic. You do you, I'll do me. You believe what you believe, I'll believe what I believe. And when culture promotes that type of thinking in general about God as being wise and true, then the natural outcome is a perverse society. That's a natural outcome of that. Because if we don't worship the one true God, we will worship his greatest creatures, the ones created in his image and likeness. And then what happens when you worship humans, perverse things occur. Now, this isn't just me saying this. Romans is clear about this. Also, our society, when you just look at it with clear lenses on, you see it. But Romans chapter 1 says this, claiming to become wise, they became fools. And they exchanged the glory of God for the image of man. Therefore, God gave them over to the sinful desires of their hearts, to sexual impurity, to the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and they worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Now, I share all of this with this church today to remind us also that sex is an incredible gift that has been given to us by God to be enjoyed, to be celebrated, to be utilized, right? But in order for it to be beneficial for us, we need to engage with it in a way in which the Creator, the one who created it, desires for us to engage with it, okay? Now, I know so many of us in the church world, we were raised to believe that God is a prude, God's whack, have sex with the lights off so he can't see. Like, this is just what we're raised. We don't talk about this in church. Oh my gosh, I can't believe we're in church. Someone get a picture of this. This is crazy. He's talking about sex. Oh my gosh, this is not. That's how we're raised in the church. The church has been so afraid of this topic. And because of that, we have a false view of this topic. Now, God is not a prude. As a matter of fact, he'd be far more considered a hedonist than he is a prude. He wants to maximize our pleasure. All that God does is for the joy of his people, right? Even the pain that is brought into your life that he allows, the discipline that he allows us to walk into is for our maximized joy and pleasure. Now, when we don't use sex the way that it was intended to be utilized, and we treat sex as if it's cheap, it doesn't just not maximize our pleasure, it actually produces prolonged pain, okay? Now, this isn't just the Bible that would articulate this, or this is not just my opinion, right? This isn't just a religious thing, it's scientific research. Kinsey Institute recently collaborated with Binghamton University to study the mental effects of casual hookups, and this was their secular conclusion. You ready? Casual sex slowly destroys people's state of mind. People who find themselves engaging in non-committal sex, sex with strangers, sex outside of marital commitment, and sexual activity with no romantic interests, such as friends with benefits, tend to be left feeling ashamed, guilt-ridden, and suffer low self-esteem and mental health issues that can lead to severe sexual dysfunction. Now, isn't that so far different from what culture tells us, right? Isn't that so different from how culture portrays sex? Do you have fun? It's gonna be so great. It's gonna be awesome. Sleep with as many people as you want, however you want, whenever you want, wherever you want. Just go do you. Culture baits us to use sex in a way that it wasn't designed to be used, and then act surprised when the stats come out and the research says it leaves us feeling ashamed and dirty and confused and regretful. Think about how different things could be if just the church operated within this gift the way that God intended. Think about the effects of unwanted pregnancies and abortion and STDs and rape and molestation and sexual abuse and the effects that it has on today's society. Think about if just the people in the church operated with this in a way that God intended for it to be operated with, how different things might be. So, the question then is, how do we do this right? How do we do it right? Like, this is an awkward topic for so many of us in the room right now because we've done it so wrong. We're ashamed to talk to our kids about sex because we feel like, who am I to share with them how to do this right when I wasn't able to do it right? We're ashamed of things that have happened to us in the past and the hurts that sex has created for us because maybe we didn't know what was right and what was wrong, and or maybe we were mistreated or abused or taken advantage of, and so therefore this topic now has become awkward. So the question though is, how do we do this right? So in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, right, the city of Corinth, it's a very sexual society. You have temple prostitution, you have strip clubs, swingers, side pieces, booty calls, you got mistresses, one-night stands, you got gay, straight, bi, try, everything. You got it's just no hold bars, have fun. The other thing is that there were no such thing as sexually immoral laws. So things like molestation or prostitution or incest or rape or polygamy or sex with animals, all of it is legal. It's legal. If you do it, there's no repercussions of it. So at some point, the Apostle Paul rolls into the city and he tells his people, and he starts communicating the good news of Jesus to these people. And these people become absolutely transformed as they trust in the gospel message of Christ. And so when that happens, things begin to shift. Their hope is now all of a sudden in Jesus. Their security is in Jesus. Their provision is in Jesus. Their value, their identity is in Jesus. They used to be about like take care of number one. I'm gonna get mine. I'm gonna be served by you. I'm gonna take advantage of you because there's no problem with that for me, right? It was all about using people for personal gain or their own pleasure. But now that the gospel has affected them, penetrated them, right, from the inside out, is birthing something new. We're taking what was old and dead and bringing to life something that is completely new. There's something that changes in them. Now they want to love others. Now they want to serve others. Now they want to be committed to one another. Now they want to be generous. Now they want to bear one another's burdens. And because of this, these new followers of Jesus now had all these questions because of their perverse society about how to steward this gift that God has given them in a way that is most honorable to Jesus and beneficial for them and each other. And so, what do? Think about it. They write the Apostle Paul a letter to ask questions about it. I ain't never got that email. None of you sent me that email ever. They write their pastor. They're like, hey, pastor, talk to me about this. I want to know how to do this right. You know what I'm saying? I've done it. You know what I'm saying? I've done it, but I want to do it right. Fill me in. Let me know how the people of Jesus are supposed to operate with this. What am I supposed to do? Talk to me about all of it. I want to know all of it. I want to know technique. I want to know all of it. And the Apostle Paul's like, okay, let me help you think through some of this. And so he responds back and writes them back a letter. Now, the sexual worldview in Corinth is not going to sound new to us, okay? It's not going to sound new. There's nothing new under the sun. People think, we come up with these new things, it's like, this new problem, there's nothing new. You're asking the same stupid questions that they were asking 2,000 years ago. We just don't like the answers, okay? So the worldview is the same, right? Their questions are, hey, we're consenting adults. Nobody's getting hurt. Their questions are, it's my body. I should be free to do it with my body. Don't tell me what I can or cannot do with my body. They're saying it's a natural biological urge. What's the big deal? I'm a man. I'm a woman. I have desires. They're saying what I do with my body is my business. Stop talking to me about my body. God knows my heart. That's the church one. God knows my heart. I've heard if I had $1 for every time, I could retire, right? God knows my heart, right? Oh, he knows my heart. And it's like, he does. He does. And he was like, Jesus, you got to go and do something about this. We need to fix this. This is not good. He knows your heart, okay? So Paul addresses this in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 to begin to deconstruct the cultural views of sex and reconstruct God's heart, not your heart, for this incredible gift. Turn with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 6. We'll look at verse 9, and we're going to go all the way through chapter 7, verse 5. We got a lot to cover. It says this, or do you not know, this is the Apostle Paul speaking, that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? He's not talking here about actual salvation, believe it or not. In other words, he's saying, do you not know that people under the banner of my kingdom see things differently, believe things differently, live differently? He says, do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral or idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. And such were some of you. And he's saying, for some of you, this is what defined you. When you were not under the banner of the kingdom of God, what defined you, what drove you, what you identified with, your entire being was wrapped up in this sexual identity or these sexual pursuits or these pursuits of these counterfeit gods that bring temporary pleasures. But then he says, but you were washed. Talking to the church, the followers of Jesus, you were washed. You are sanctified. You are justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of God. You are no longer defined or driven by this false way of life. You are now rooted in, stabilized by Christ our King, period. And now we look at his kingdom and how his kingdom operates, and all that we do, right, flows from that way of life, knowing that the enemy has come to steal, kill, and destroy, but Jesus has come to bring life and life abundantly. And so let's operate in the way that Jesus intends for us to operate. Not because God's a killjoy, but because he desires our maximum pleasure. So in verse 12, it says this. This is one of their arguments. And he puts it's in quotes. All things are lawful for me. And Paul goes, yeah, but not all things are helpful. And they go, all things are lawful for me. And he says, yeah, but we're not supposed to be dominated or mastered by anything. And here's the argument. The argument is, hey, two consenting adults, there's no rape, no harm, right? We're even of age, there's no problem. It's not illegal. It feels good. Aren't we free to do what we want to do? Paul says, just because it's illegal just because it's legal doesn't make it right. Since when did you think just because something is legal that all of a sudden it is right? I mean, forget just our, like, if we look globally, there's a lot of things that are legal globally that nobody in this room would say is right. But even in our society, There's a lot of things that are legal that we would look at and be like, oh, no, 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 no. As those who live under the banner of the kingdom of the king, we would have to say that's wrong. Like in the vast majority of states, right, you can literally kill a child in the womb of a mother just because you don't want it. In 15 states, you can have sex with animals and marry your first cousin. I don't see nobody in here like, let's do that. Let's go. Let's go, Pastor. Right? This was crazy. I saw that this week. Cannibalism, eating human flesh, is legal and nutritional. But we don't eat people when they die. We bury them. Why? Because there's just some things. There's got to be just some things, right? Where I'm like, that just seems a little wrong. And they're like, hey, but I'm free to do what I want to do. And Paul's response is like, are you free? Number one, he who the Son sets free is free indeed, but free to do what? Free to not do what he says not to do. And what would bring harm to yourself. See, a lot of us, we claim to be free to do what we want to do, but you're a slave and you have no self-control. So you're really not free, right? You're not free. You're a slave to your own ways. So you got to think about it. When you say you're free, prove it. Prove it. And then the other argument is this, verse 13. Food is meant for the stomach and the stomach for food, and God will destroy both one and the other. This is their argument, right? And then he goes, the body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. And God raised the Lord and will also raise us up by his power. And so people in this day are using the argument, hey, listen, it's just a natural biological urge. Yo, when you're hungry, what do? You eat some food. Right? When you're thirsty, what do? You drink something. And when you're horny, what do? You have sex. It's just natural. Why are we talking about this? It's just normal for, if you're hungry, if you have a craving, you satisfy that craving. The problem is that we're not highly evolved animals. You've been created in the image and likeness of God. God had granted you a soul. Upon belief, he has given you his spirit to be united with your spirit, making you one, bonding you. Sex is not just a physical act. Again, the stats would say that, right? Why is it that you could be sexually abused at a young age and can't just forget about it and move on? Because it cuts deeper than that. We'll get to more of that in a second. Look at this, verse 15. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall then I take the members of Christ and make them members of a prostitute? He says, never. Now, in this day, this is important to understand. In this day, prostitution was a normal way of life. It was kind of the most robust, sexually perverse activity that everybody was engaged in. Today, it would be like pornography, okay? It'd be like porn. Kind of everybody's doing it, everybody's involved in it, everybody's seen it. You have to think of it in those terms. It was a part of temple worship, right? They didn't have things like magazines, which we don't even have those anymore, right? It's just internet now. But they didn't have those things like we have today. And so what they would do is they'd run to prostitution. It was one of the most prevalent industries of its day, okay? Similar to how pornography has become that for us. And what Paul is saying here, he's like, listen, do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Are you going to use those bodies, right, to act like this and unite, make yourself one, right, with this prostitute? And he says, or do you not know that he was joined? And this is so important. This might be the biggest thing that you learned all day. Look at verse 16. Or do you not know that he who is joined, that word joined means glued or bonded, okay? That he who is joined to a prostitute becomes one body with her. For as it is written, the two shall become one flesh. But he who is joined, again, bonded or glued to the Lord, becomes one spirit with him. This was fascinating to me this week. The Apostle Paul associates the joining, the gluing, the bonding that occurs at salvation between a believer and Jesus to the same bonding that occurs between sexual partners. So, science, okay, is the systematic study of a natural world. That's what science is. We are studying what exists in the physical, natural world. And as followers of Jesus, as Christians, those who believe that we know the Creator, as Christians, we believe that God created the natural world. And so by believing that, we also must believe that all that science is simply the unveiling of the beauty of God's creation. That's all that science is, right? Science isn't coming up with anything new. It's not creating anything new. It's simply unveiling what has already been in existence because God made it that way. And when you research and you study the science behind sex, it will blow your mind. This comes from an article from Options Health, which is a secular nonprofit organization out of California that provides health care to individuals and their families in the area of sexual health, pregnancy, and parenting. This is what they say. Again, secular organization to explain the science behind sex. It says within sex, there's a bonding that occurs. And it supersedes a mere skin to skin connection. There's a bonding that occurs. I just thought it was fascinating that here we are 2,000 years removed from Paul's writing as he's writing it, and science is using the same exact word that Paul uses. Scientifically, we know that sex engages us hormonally, neurologically, and psychologically as it forms intense bonds mentally, emotionally, and physically, especially when we do it over and over and over again. It says during sexual activity, the human body releases powerful neurohormones in the brains of men and women called oxytocin and vasopressin. During sexual activity, oxytocin is released, which acts as an emotional superglue bonding partners together. In addition, men release vasopressin, which similarly bonds him to his partner and instills a protective instinct towards them. Some call this the commitment hormone or the monogamy molecule. There is a third set of hormones called endorphins that's released during sexual activity. Endorphins are what we call happy hormones. They are highly addictive and cause us to want to come back to experience this rush again and again and again and again. Now, here's what's scary. What makes things so interesting about this is that these hormones are values neutral, okay? They're values neutral. So what that means is whether it's a one-time encounter or a lifelong commitment or a tragic experience, there is a neurological bonding that crystallizes these memories into our minds, making these encounters and these experiences difficult to forget. You know this is true. You know this is true. This is why you could think of a day where you experience some sort of sexual activity and you can't remember much about the moments before or even about after, but man, go ahead and let me think about that moment. I could do it. In a monogamous marriage, oxytocin and vasopressin and endorphins biologically increase the bond between a husband and wife and act as a bonding agent, it says. This is their words. Unlike anything else that can be produced naturally or even in labs. That's crazy. What an incredible designer our God is. One way to think about it is like the bonding effect of duct tape. You take duct tape, and if someone were to duct tape me and Beth together and link us together, right? If we were to take that duct tape off, right? Parts of our self would come off with it. Some of the hair on our body, you know what I'm saying? Some of our skin cells, and it would make it more difficult to now reattach that somewhere else. Well, this is what happens when stress hormones are released. Your ability to produce oxytocin, right, is now more difficult to be produced. And so when there's a breakup or there's a bad sexual experience of some sort, right? Or you sense regret or shame or rejection sexually, your ability to create oxytocin is therefore then greatly reduced. And then what happens then is it's now more difficult to bond to the partner that I really want to bond to. So what does the Apostle Paul say? Look at verse 18. He's like, well, here's what you should do. You know, here's flee! Flee from sexual immorality. Literally means escape, run. Like, dip out, go, disappear quickly. Like, you were, just chilling, I'm on a business trip and I hop on an elevator and homegirl hops on with you. Get off now. Get off. Get off. I'm in the dorms hanging. Dude comes in. Oh, it's not gonna, hello, what's going on? Get out. I'm going, go. Run. Run. Text comes in, what you doing? Oh, you want Netflix, chill, You text back, emoji hands up in the air, prayer sign, you know what I'm saying? The angel emoji, you know what I'm saying? The peace sign, the dookie sign, you do all of it. Like, I'm out. The poof run sign, you know what I'm talking about? That's what Paul's saying. He's like, dip out, go. This is why Nikes should always be worn by single people, always. Nike Freeze. Or Hokas. Hokas are like the new thing. At least that's what I'd like to think because I had to wear them. My orthopedic surgeon told me to. Never mind. I'm getting old. So why? Why is this? Why does Paul so deeply desire sexual restraint from his people? There's this whole movement in like the Christian world, it's like, the perversion of purity, and it's like how purity hurts people. And let me just tell you, you're like 19 years old, you don't know nothing, so until you live, then talk to us, right? But seriously, young Christians, it's like, sexual, suppression is so dangerous and you're harming people, all this stuff. Really? All right. Then talk to me about this. Paul says every other sin a person commits is outside of the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. Statistically speaking, right, why is it true? Why does the CDC, nobody even knew what the CDC was until like 2 years ago, by the way. Isn't that hilarious? COVID hit and we were like, we're all CDC experts. We had no idea what CDC. Why does the CDC say having multiple sex partners prior to marriage makes you statistically less happy in marriage and increases the odds of divorce? Like Paul says, listen, this is bad for you. Like he says, the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. He's like, listen, there's ways to sin against each other, and that's bad. Christ had to die for that, right? And that's, let's not sin against each other. But there's sin that exists where you ain't just sinning against others. You're hurting yourself. You're hurting yourself. Now, I don't want to get into all the different reasons. We could talk about them all day long until we're blue in the face. But let me talk about the one that nobody wants to talk about. Let's talk about proper partner selection. Hebrews says don't be unequally yoked. So unequally yoked, basically a yoke is something that goes on my neck and will go on somebody else's neck if we were like a bull and we were carrying something behind us and walking forward, right? Whatever that would be. You know what I'm talking about, right? Unequally means one's stronger than the other. And so if the stronger one is heading in this direction, it's going to pull me with you, right? And Paul says, really, Christians, we know ourselves to be weak. Actually, it's in our weakness that we're strong. We're not that strong. We're going to get pulled. And this is fluent all throughout the scriptures. This is brought up first by Moses in the book of Exodus, this idea. And so Paul is like, listen, if you're not careful, you don't treat this right, okay? You're going to be pulled in a direction because it's powerful. So proper partner selection becomes difficult when a person receives these things that God created as gifts for us at the wrong time. So when you receive the immediate natural bonding chemicals that the body produces, those biological rewards cause a person to all of a sudden now overlook and deny the deeper, more incompatible areas of a relationship. So like I've already mentioned to you last week, there's 4 types of intimacies. Physical intimacy, right? There's also the emotional, relational, and spiritual. And so what you do is if you focus on sexual intimacy, it makes you think that those other intimacies are so put together. And so scientifically speaking, early sex is a counterfeit intimacy that makes 2 people believe that they are closer and more compatible than they really are. This is why dudes are known, right? This is funny, but like embarrassing. This is why dudes are known to make statements. I read this week. A psychologist said it blew my mind. Dudes, men, tend to drop the I love you line during the act of sex for the first time. On average, it tends to be then. I love you. Whoa. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. Dr. Andrew Maggers wrote in an article called The Science of Sex Before Marriage, says research supports the fact that those who wait to have sex until married have significantly higher relationship satisfaction by 20%, better communication patterns by 12%, less consideration of divorce by 22%, and better sexual quality by 15%. Because science is unveiling what God has always known to be true. And then he says, or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, from whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. The argument here is, it's my body. I could do what I want. It's my body. Let me do me. My body, my choice. Oh, it's your body. Did you create your body? Where were you when your body was formed in your mother's womb and being beautifully knit together? The common question is always, where's the line? I get that one a lot. Where's the line? Where's the line? Well, God has actually built in radars in the human psyche and brain and biology for us to know when we're being aroused. But you want to know where the line is? He says, glorify God in your body. There's the line. There's the line. If there's any doubt whether or not you are glorifying God in this moment with your body, then you should avoid it, right? No amens on that one, I guess. All right, let's get to good stuff. Now, concerning the matters which you wrote about. I love this. They're like, hey, we got more questions. And Paul's like, I got you. Let's go. All right. He said, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. This is Paul's way of saying, listen, I don't know how to explain this to you. Bro, it's overrated. It's overrated. They're saying, sex is, Paul's like, you think it's something that it's not. And if you're not careful, right, you'll think so highly of it that you will make poor decisions to have it. And so he says it's good not to have sexual relations with a woman, right? And then Paul will point to, right, the idea of marriage. He says, but because of the temptation of sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman his own husband. Paul here, and in other places, he's like, listen, it's not good. It's good for a man to not be sexually active, and it's even good for a man not to marry. And his point is, marriage is hard. It takes hard work. It adds stress. It adds time to your life. There's going to be moments where you want to quit. Marriage is not for your joy. Marriage is not for your satisfaction. It's for your sanctification. Marriage is not to keep you happy. It's to provide a loving relationship where you can both be known and be loved. And then he says, and because of the temptation for sexual immorality, however, every man should have his own wife and every woman her own husband. And what Paul's saying here is like, listen, God has made us in a certain way, right? There is real desires. There are real cravings. There is a real desire to eat and drink and be satisfied, yes or no, right? There is that. And so if you have those desires, you should operate in the way in which God intended. Go find a wife. Go find a husband. That's what you should be doing. We are created to bond together. We are created to be connected, right? We're created to do this. And sex is the physical expression of all these intimacies coming together in a physical way. And it's a beautiful thing. And so therefore, you should go find somebody to go and do that with if you desire that. Now listen, let me just talk about this for a second. We're getting married older and older and older and older and later and later and later in life. Okay? And people are like, well, should I just get married just to have sex? I'm not saying that. But the fact that you elevate money and your career, you elevate that above deep longing for being bonded to another human being. I know a lot of people that have bad careers and great marriages. I know a lot of people that don't have a lot of money, but have a lot of love in their relationship with their spouse. And our society has become so obsessed with finances and education that we use that as a means to try to suppress people's desires. It's not just for sex, ladies and gentlemen. It's to be bonded. That's what you desire. You long to be connected to God's image bearers because that's how he made us to be, and you can't suppress that. So he says to his people, you should have a wife. You should find a husband. Hear me out. If you're dating for years and years and years and years, just let that person go, please. Just let him go. If you're unwilling to, you're like, well, is it really about the paper? It's like, it is. Let me show you this. It says the husband should give to his wife her conjugal right. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal right. That word conjugal, right, is associated actually with the word covenant. It actually means a debt owned. It's legally binding, right? A payment due. Isn't that crazy, yo? That when God speaks about sex, he's like, listen, fellas, okay, when it comes to this topic of bonding and intimacy, you need to give this woman her right. You need to contractually give her what she is contractually obligated to. Now, when men hear that, right, they hear like, oh my gosh, yo, I'm contractually obligated to have sex with my wife. I'm all in. Let's go. But it's deeper than that. Right? Yes, your job is to make sure that you provide pleasure for your wife, and that is due to her, right? But there's also ways to bring pleasure and satisfaction to her, and it is your responsibility to provide that for her, and only your responsibility, right? So when you promise to love this woman through sickness and health, you're promising more than just sexual pleasure, but also that. But you're also promising to provide for this woman, to care for this woman, to pray for this woman, to sacrifice for this woman, to create a safe environment for her to be fully known and fully loved and to be understood and to provide for her in all sorts of ways, to talk to her and listen to her, to be the greatest depiction of Christ on this earth for her. No, nobody wants to talk about that. Dudes are all hyped, though, when it comes to like, listen, I get to sexually provide for you, girl. That's my job, yo. And I'm going to work overtime, and you don't got to pay me nothing. I don't need no health benefits. I don't need no social security. Yeah, I will show up on time. And that's important. It says, and likewise, the wife needs to provide for her husband. Again, conjugal, a debt owed, a payment due. It sounds so transactional, doesn't it? It does. It sounds so transactional. And we don't like the idea of it being transactional. But what it is communicating to you is what God is providing here for us is the depth of understanding of the power of this gift. Likewise, the wife to her husband, right? Women, ladies, wives, you're not off the hook. Your man has desires. He has wants. You're not the only one. You are the only one of the 3.5 billion people on the planet that have the right and ability to provide this for him, to fulfill those needs, to fulfill those desires. God has placed you in your husband's life to assist him in knowing that he is loved and wanted and desired and satisfied. So interesting. There's two very conflicting studies that have been done surrounding the satisfaction of sex. Two very conflicting results, rather, that come from these studies. So on one hand, researchers say that faithful married couples report having both the most frequent sex and the most satisfying sex lives. And the surveys say that conservative Christian women report having the most satisfying sex lives. Here's where there's a bit of a conflict, though. Studies also say that among all the men that deal with sexual frustrations, it is married men who are among the highest sexually frustrated people in the world. 39% of married men claim to have some level of sexual frustration as it pertains to frequency and freedom. That is higher than widowed husbands, divorced husbands, and separated husbands. Why is that? Well, fellas, are you frustrated that your wife isn't a porn star and she can't perform for you like some sort of unrealistic sexual superhero like you've been watching? That could be part of it. Maybe if you ease your expectations by letting her be the model of perfection for you, you'd be more satisfied. That could be it. Are you communicating your frustrations? Is it that she doesn't know that you're frustrated? Or when you do communicate your frustrations, does your wife have the freedom to express why she doesn't want to have sex with that level of freedom or that level of frequency? Are you being sensitive to the areas of needs that she has? When she says like, well, I don't want to have sex with you because I don't feel connected to you. Are you simply like, well, there's this bonding mechanism that Pastor Matt talked to us about? Like, or do you really want to listen to her and hear? Do you believe that her needs aren't as big of a deal as your needs? You should dig into that. Now, I will say, and this will be controversial, but I haven't cared about whether or not I've been controversial for 12 years. So you might not like what I say, and I haven't cared about that for 12 years either. So now married men weren't always the most sexually frustrated population, okay? Again, do a deep dive study on your own. It's very much possible, and it seems to be as you study it, that there is this association with this cultural movement that communicates to women that their body belongs to them. It's my body, it's my choice. I do what I want with my body. Don't tell me what to do otherwise. That all of a sudden creeps into the people of God that live under the banner of God's kingdom. Now, do not hear what I'm not saying, okay? I am not here to tell you that some misogynistic man should have the right or to take advantage of his wife. That is not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that all of a sudden what creeps into the church are these worldly views. And so what you often find in the church is that this ideology has crept into the Christian home where godly men are called to love their wife like Christ loves the church. So they find themselves suppressing their desires for the sake of their wife in whom they love. And in turn, it leads the husband to feel frustrated while the wife is satisfied statistically because the husband's not going to ever say no to her, deny her. And so Paul, what does he say next? He says, for the wife's body does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Okay, too far, Paul. I liked all that idea of like salvation in Christ alone, through faith alone, by grace alone. I'm down with that, but I don't know about this one. I don't think that's inspired, really. No, all this is saying here, though, is to have a keen understanding in the relationship of your marriage where the husband is clear and knows, listen, that belongs to me. That belongs to me, too. So when Beth is in the kitchen and, she's cooking something, and I pop her on her butt a little bit, and she's like, stop it, don't you do that. I said, don't tell me what to do with my body. That is my body. That's my body, babe. Right? I want to just talk about my body. Not a big deal. I got a verse. But then look next. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Right? She's like, hallelujah. She's like, hallelujah. And so what this means is when you're sitting in bed and your wife is over there watching TV, she's watching The Bachelor, and you just ain't interested, and you like over there like, I want to go to sleep, and she just takes your arm like Beth does to me, and she just goes like this, and she puts it on her head. She's like, rub my hair. And I'm like, babe, this hurts my arm. She's like, I don't feel nothing. Doesn't feel like my arm's hurting. Right? Right? I don't know. This means when your wife tells you, hey, brush your teeth, do it. You smell bad. Don't wear that. Do it. Listen. Pay attention. Okay? Cleve, we were talking about tattoos. You remember we were talking about tattoos? Cleveland and I were talking about tattoos. He was like, yo, this is like a couple years ago. We were talking about tattoos. He's like, yo, I want to get a bunch of tattoos. I was like, here's the deal. You need to hurry the heck up, bro. You're a good-looking dude. You're a great guy. Somebody's going to try to like husband you up quick. And so you need to go and get all them tattoos because the second you get wifed up and she's like, I don't want you having any more tattoos. You have to listen. That's her body. So Cleve's got them everywhere now. And then it says this in verse 5. Do not deprive one another. Do not deprive one another. That word deprive means rob or cheat or steal. It's interesting, like the Old Testament correlation goes back to Malachi chapter 3 where it says, the story of the tithe where it says, don't rob God, right? With your tithes and your offerings. And everybody here is like, oh, great, another, I knew it was it always ties back into tithe, doesn't it, Pastor? Sure. But what he's saying, he's like, listen, don't hoard what belongs to them. Don't deprive one another. Isn't it beautiful that God in his infinite wisdom implements a literal scientific bonding mechanism that would cause us to stick together through thick and thin, in good times and bad, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health. God, in his loving design, installs an override system to cause us to feel devoted and loyal and possessive and willing to endure trials in order to keep us intact with this covenantal relationship. Like, how awesome is God, who knew that days in our marriages would get hard. He knew that we'd need help choosing each other day after day. He knew that some days we wouldn't like our spouse. We love them. Not liking you right now. He knew that we'd argue, get frustrated, deal with outside circumstances that distance one another. He knew that bills would come in and babies would get sick and work hours would get long. He knew that the in-laws would show up uninterrupted or uninvited and emergencies would all of a sudden happen. What an intelligent designer we have here who says to us, listen, do not deprive one another, because if you're stealing or taking or robbing from them what belongs to them, God what you're doing is God is insinuating here that you are robbing them of the bonding that you both desire. He's insinuating that we need to be more like Jesus, who was a giver, not a taker. The people of Jesus are to live more like Jesus. The Son of Man did not come to serve or to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom. Philippians says, in your relationships with another, have the same mindset as Christ, who being in the very nature of God did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the nature of a servant. Jesus came to give, not to take, to serve, not to be served. There are times, right, where Beth thinks that I'm insane because of the desires or the needs that I have, and I think that Beth is crazy for the desires and the needs that she have. And the point that Paul is making in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 is that there's nothing wrong with having different desires and needs, but the only way to build a healthy and ultimately intimate marriage is by having a giving and serving spirit like Jesus, where you're willing to meet a desire that you don't have. Do you hear that? Your marriage would be awesome if you're willing to meet desires that you don't have, but they do. I don't need Beth to get me coffee in the morning. She loves when I get it for her. She doesn't need the house straightened up to feel at peace in her home. I do. I don't need Beth to protect me against haters. She does. Right? She doesn't need to be held tightly. She's claustrophobic. She's like, she doesn't like that. I do. I don't need long conversations where our feelings are validated and to feel close to her. She needs that. Or she doesn't need sex multiple times a week to feel bonded to me. I do. And if we are willing, as the people of God who are married, and if you're in here and you desire marriage, this is so important for you to understand. If you're willing to listen to your spouse and believe them about what their desires and needs are and to serve them with a giving spirit, you will build something great. But on the other hand, if you shame someone for what is a God-given desire and refuse to meet that desire in the most covenantal relationship that God has provided, you can create something that is catastrophic. So Paul then says, do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement. That's a united decision for a limited time. That's translated short time, that you may devote yourself or give yourself to prayer. That word prayer is a juncture term for supplication and thanksgiving and worship. And what is crazy about this is the scientific power when you do a study behind prayer and worship. I'll read this to you in the book called How God Changes Our Brain, Breakthroughs Findings from a Leading Neuroscientist. One of the authors, Dr. Andrew Newberg, says this: many of you are wondering, obviously, do I even believe in God? I'm not sure that God exists, he says. My associate Mark Waldman does, or doesn't believe that God exists at all. I'm not sure. But what we can prove to you scientifically is that believing that God exists is fundamentally good for you as a human being. Prayer and worship of a higher power, of a God, stimulates serotonin, a mood stabilizer, and dopamine, it's the reward and pleasure system, right? Which are chemical messages that communicate to the nerves and that communicate to the nervous system how we view the world. In essence, people who pray together have a larger sense of oneness and transcendence when the person praying feels connected to and aligned with God, and then they also feel that same connection with each other. So basically he's saying, listen, if you're not going to have sex with you, if one of you is like, hey, I don't want to have sex, like I'm not in the mood, whatever it is, I'm tired, whatever it is, right? Paul's like, cool, but like, can you pray? Can you worship together? Because ultimately what you need is to be bonded. And God has designed us to bond. And then he says, but then come together, do not deprive one another except for mutual consent for the purpose of devoting yourself to prayer. But then come together again so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I just love this, right? Sex is like going to the gym. This is it. We know we have to exercise. We know we're the best version of ourselves, right? We know that we know that if we want to stay in shape, even though it's not our top priority list, top on our priority list, we know when we're healthy and we're not healthy. Sex is kind of like that for marriage with going to the gym. You go to the gym to get healthy, to get strong. Sex is one of those things. Whereas if you don't utilize it the way that God has intended to you, and you don't lean on it for its benefits, for the bonding relationship, then there is a real danger that can occur. You need to biblically understand its importance and make a commitment to it. And if you don't, just know that you have a real enemy that loves to creep in during these times, and you will sense all of a sudden a bitterness or a resentment within a relationship that you didn't have before. All of a sudden, next thing you know, there was a problem that I didn't even know we were having a problem. Things that you didn't used to complain about, now you start complaining about. Am I wrong in this? I mean, come on. And so, right? Let's operate with this gift appropriately and biblically. All right? That's it. We're not going to take communion today. What we're going to do is we're just going to worship today. And if you're here with your spouse, I would like for you to grab your spouse's hand. Hold it. If you're here with somebody you're dating, that's great too. Hold their hand. Worship Christ together. Allow God to use this time as a means of, even scientifically speaking, uniting the church, the people of Christ together. And let's sing to him and worship him. All right? Sound good? Let's stand.